Hi everyone, this is Gonçalo, and today I'm going to show you what changed in the UI Navigation 2.0 update. For those of you who don't know, UI Navigation has an updated version, which will only be supported starting at 4.22. That means that versions 4.19, 20, and 21 will no longer be supported, and will remain with the previous version of the plugin, which is 1.4.1. The reason why I decided to launch a new version was so that things in the current version could be made a little bit easier and also to support new features much more easily. The first thing that changed is the fact that buttons no longer have an individual button navigation struct associated with them. Now they simply are contained inside of grids, which can have a number of UINF buttons and also contain an edge navigation which will be individual to each grid and not to each button. The button navigation grid has also changed. It used to have indices in 4 directions, and now it simply has a reference to each of the buttons. Regarding the grid struct, it has a grid type, which can be either horizontal, vertical, or grid 2D. And depending on its type, its dimensions will be different. If it's a horizontal type, it will have a dimension X of its dimension and dimension Y of 0. If it's a vertical grid, it will have a dimension X of 0 and a dimension Y of its dimension. And in order to make it easier for you to access the dimension, there is the getGridDimension function, which will simply return the grid's dimension depending on its type. You can also get a grid associated with a certain button, because all buttons must have an associated grid. Make sure to check that that grid is valid. You can check whether a button is inside of a grid. And you can also get the button at a specific index of the grid. If that button for some reason doesn't exist, it will return null. The grid also has the edge navigation and wrap properties, which already existed. It has a reference to the first button, which is the button where the grid starts, and it has its index within the navigation grids array. Another thing that slightly changed are the append navigation functions. The previous functions are now deprecated, which means that they work, but they will generate a warning on compilation. The reason for that is so that I could collapse both the horizontal and vertical functions within just one function, and then I wanted to keep the naming consistent, so I decided to rename some of the functions, and now we have these two. Keep in mind that the previous functions will work just as well as the new ones, so the only thing that's stopping you is really a compilation warning. Lastly, two things have changed. The useSelector boolean has been removed, and in order to check whether you want to use the selector, the plugin will check if there is a variable called the selector and if that variable isn't collapsed. And if both those things are true, the plugin will know that you will want to use a selector. Lastly, the override button indices boolean has been removed, and now the plugin will simply check if the default button index is -1. If it is -1, that index will be attributed directly. If it is not, the index will be left as is. And that's really it for UI Navigation 2.0. Hope to hear from you soon. Goodbye.